For conservatives, this puts them in sort of a weird spot, because if you're trying to re-enshrine respect for American history, if you're trying to reestablish an American unity that's based on fundamental principle, how do you think the Trump administration plays into this? So I was obviously deeply uneasy about Trump's election in 2016. I didn't vote for either of the major candidates, specifically because I had significant fears that President Trump was going to toxify an entire generation of young people to conservatism, because he is personally so divisive and polarizing. I obviously underestimated how conservative he would be in office. I thought he wasn't going to be particularly conservative based on his prior record. And then he turned out to be quite conservative, at least on everything except for spending, which no Republican apparently is conservative in practice on. But the question of how we unify Americans around conservative principles, or really just around basic American history, that question is very much open from the right side of the aisle, given how polarizing Trump is. So how exactly should conservatives deal with Trump? Is he an asset in this effort? Is he a detriment to the effort, or an obstacle? Where do you think that stands?
Donald Trump will be gone in 1 year or 5. And I have lived long enough, this again, to tell you that even 5 years isn't that long. So conservatives should be planning, should be thinking, should be sorting out policy and planning on what happens after Donald Trump leaves. As for Donald Trump himself, I quite often get asked the question, what would Ronald Reagan have made of Donald Trump? Well, of course, there are obvious points that the bad language, the indiscipline, the inability to seem to give a speech and stick with the agenda laid out in the speech, Ronald Reagan would have found all of that very distasteful. On the other hand, Ronald Reagan was a practical man and a working politician. The most perceptive, insightful political scientist I've ever read was the old vaudeville comedian Henny Youngman. And here is the basis for all truly useful political analysis. It's a Henny Youngman gag. Question, how's your wife? Answer, compared to what? All right? So the question about Donald Trump is compared to what? And compared to Hillary Clinton, Trump. Compared to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, Trump. This may be half crazy, but I almost think when I consider Donald Trump, I remember the way the teachers used to tell us to look at a solar eclipse when we were little kids. Don't look at it. You can look at the shadow on the ground. You can look at the effects, but you mustn't look at the object itself. So if you put your hand over Donald Trump, here's what you see. A growing economy, growing more robustly than it has in more than a decade. You see unemployment rates at historic lows. Among African Americans and Hispanics, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded. What does that mean? That means that millions of Americans, not the press corps that can't stand Donald Trump in Washington, millions of ordinary Americans, and especially those toward the bottom of the economic distribution, are leading better lives in this economy. People have come off welfare rolls, they've come off food stamps, they're able to provide for themselves and their families. That's an achievement. Don't look at that man, but it's an achievement all the same. And so it goes with Donald Trump. The appointments to the federal bench, the never Trumper refrain. So Gorsuch, yeah, so Gorsuch, and now so Kavanaugh. The Constitution of the United States has been saved for another 20 years. Again, don't look at him, but that's the effect of it. Foreign policy, I was disconcerted to see John Bolton leave the White House. I think just as I was disconcerted to see General Mattis step down as Secretary of Defense, or H.R. McMaster as National Security Counsel before John Bolton. All that. And yet at the same time, Putin annexed Crimea under Obama. He moved into Ukraine proper again under Obama. Under Trump, he complains all the time about NATO, and yet we have troops now, part of a NATO exercise. We have troops in Poland, right on the Russian border. Israel, according to the Prime Minister of Israel, Israel is feeling as though it needs the United States and is relying on the Trump administration. So you don't want to say, you have a 3-year-old son, you don't want to say to your son, one day I'd like you to grow up to be just like Donald Trump. That would be a mistake. I would talk you out of that, Ben. But on the other hand, him Over what the Democrats are trying look as though they're going to nominate? Yes.